My name is Vivian Burke. I'm a 60-year-old woman from Baltimore, Maryland, and nothing in my life ever prepared me for what my own daughter would one day say to me. But before we get to that, let me take you back to the moment it all began unraveling. I remember exactly where I was when the call came in. It was just after 5:40 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was standing in my kitchen about to pour myself a glass of sweet tea, when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved, but I already knew. My hands trembled before I even answered it. Gregory's assistant was on the other end, her voice low, careful, too calm to be anything but bad news. She told me my husband had suffered a massive stroke at his office. By the time help arrived, there was nothing they could do. Just like that, the man I spent 34 years with gone. No warning. No goodbye. Just silence. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been hit with a wave of grief so hard, you didn't even cry right away? You just stood there, still, like your soul was waiting for someone to tell you it was a mistake. That was me. Drop a comment if you've ever lost someone unexpectedly like that, because grief don't knock. Kicks the whole door down. I didn't hear from my daughter, Layla, until the next day. Not a call. Not a text. Just a voicemail that said, "We're flying in Thursday. I'll take care of the planning. Don't worry about anything." I didn't know what she meant by we, until I saw her and her husband Elliot step into my living room, both dressed like they were arriving for a business negotiation, not to bury family. Layla didn't even hug me. She gave me that corporate smile she uses for press photos, patted my shoulder and said, "You look tired. I'll take the lead." Now I may be soft-spoken, but I'm not blind. I saw it in her eyes, the control. She didn't ask what I wanted. She handed Elliot the funeral itinerary like I was a guest, not Gregory's wife. Within hours, she'd changed the casket order, reworked the obituary, and moved the repast to a golf club neither of us had ever stepped foot in. She even corrected the pastor's pronunciation of my name during the planning meeting. I sat there silent, watching, listening, taking mental notes. And here's what hurt most. She didn't do it out of grief. She did it like it was a checklist. Like my husband's death was just another task to manage on her way to something bigger. I don't know if you've ever watched your own child move around your house like you were the inconvenience. But if you have, tell me in the comments. What did it do to your heart? I didn't say a word. Not then. Not when Elliot whispered to her during dinner like I wasn't 2 feet away. Not when she ignored every photo I laid out for the memorial board. I just smiled politely and let them believe what they wanted to believe, that I was weak, passive, too tired to fight. They thought grief had silenced me. What they didn't know was that silence is where I do my best thinking. And baby, what I was about to uncover. It would make my daughter regret ever assuming she had the upper hand. When I gave birth to Layla, I cried harder than she did. Not because of the pain, but because I was so sure I had brought light into the world. She was perfect. That kind of baby who didn't even fuss much. She had Gregory's eyes and my mother's cheekbones, and from the moment they placed her on my chest, I swore I would never let this world harden her. I raised her with every drop of tenderness I had in me. Homemade lunches, bedtime prayers, volunteering at her school. I worked night shifts at the hospital and still made it to every recital. And for a while, she was exactly what I prayed for. Bright, curious, full of love. She'd sit on my lap and say things like, "Mommy, I'm gonna build you a big house one day." And I believed her. I believed every word. But something changed. Slowly at first. I started in college. Layla got a scholarship to a business school in Atlanta. That's when she met Elliot. Back then, he was just another finance major with a slick smile and a rented Benz. Gregory didn't like him from the start. He said, That boy ain't hungry, Viv. He's shopping. He saw what family she came from and decided she was the deal. But I waved it off. I told him, they're young. Let them grow. I should have listened. The more time Layla spent with Elliot, the colder she got. She stopped calling unless she needed something. She started talking to us like we were beneath her. On one visit, she told me, "You still use a checkbook? Mom, that's embarrassing." I laughed it off, but it stung. Not because of the words, but the tone. Like she had forgotten the woman who used to stretch grocery money just to keep her in dance class. Gregory saw it earlier than I did. He'd say, "You keep trying to raise a daughter in a house she already walked out of emotionally." And he wasn't wrong. I just couldn't accept it. I wanted to believe Layla was just going through a phase. That once the wedding passed, once the career settled, she'd come back to us. But she never did. At least not the way she left. The final straw was 3 years before Gregory died. Layla missed our anniversary dinner. No call, no excuse. When I finally reached her, she said, "Elliot's parents had a fundraiser. You and Dad have had, like 30 anniversaries. You'll live." Gregory didn't speak to her for 2 months after that. I cried in the bathroom the night she said it. Not because she missed dinner, but because I realized she didn't even feel guilty. She was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at your own child and felt like you were staring into the eyes of a stranger? That ache that settles in your chest when you realize you raised them, but you don't know them anymore? Tell me in the comments if you've ever been there. Because it's the kind of heartbreak that doesn't make noise. It just settles into your bones. The woman who walked into my house after Gregory's death wasn't the little girl I rocked to sleep. She was a polished shell dressed in status and self-importance. And I knew then. Whatever softness I still held onto for her, it was starting to rot. It was 3 days after the funeral. The last casserole dish had been picked up. The house finally stopped smelling like cologne and cheap sympathy. I had just finished folding one of Gregory's dress shirts. Don't ask me why, I just needed to hold something of his, when I heard a soft knock at the guest room door. Layla stepped in like she owned the place. She didn't ask if it was a good time. She didn't even look at me properly. Elliot followed behind her, standing with his arms crossed like he was there to monitor a transaction. They were dressed too well for mourning. She wore a fitted cream suit and he had on that same smug smirk he always wore like cologne. "Mom," she said flatly, "we need to talk before we leave." I nodded, folded the shirt, and sat down on the edge of the bed. Layla didn't sit. She just paced slightly and folded her arms like she was building up to something noble. Waited. "Look," she started, her tone shifting to that polished fake soft voice she used when talking to donors. "We've been talking with Thomas Reed, Daddy's lawyer." I nodded again. I had already spoken to Thomas privately, but I didn't let on. Layla glanced at Elliot, then looked back at me with that cold, clinical sharpness I'd only ever seen in boardrooms and betrayal movies. And then she said it. "You'll get nothing out of the $50 million Daddy left. He told us everything is ours." Just like that. No hesitation. No blink. Like she was telling me the weather forecast. I don't remember blinking either. I just sat there staring at her, my hands resting on my lap, the same way they did when I brought her home from the hospital wrapped in a yellow blanket with duck prints. She didn't stop. "Daddy said you were tired. He said the money would be a lot to manage, and we're already working closely with his partners to secure everything. We'll handle the assets. You should just take time to rest and enjoy whatever you need." Whatever I need. Like I was being offered a pension instead of a place in my own husband's legacy. Elliot chimed in then. Thomas will handle the transition, so no need for legal drama. We want this to stay clean. It took everything in me not to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because they really thought I was that naive. That broken. That forgettable. Let me pause here and ask you something. Has your own child ever looked you in the face and told you that you'd be left behind? That you'd be erased from the life you helped build? Comment and tell me if you've ever been stabbed with a smile, because that's exactly what it felt like. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "Thank you for letting me know." They seemed almost relieved that I took it so calmly. Layla walked out first. Elliot stayed for half a second longer, like he expected me to beg. I didn't. Because what I had in my pocket, what Gregory left for me to find, was going to silence both of them louder than any words ever could. And when the day came, that very same lawyer, he would be the first one to laugh. I didn't open Gregory's study until the fourth night. I'd been avoiding it, walking past that door like it could reach out and pull me back into a grief I wasn't ready to face. That room had always been his sanctuary. The smell of mahogany, cigar boxes he never lit, and that dark leather chair with a crooked left armrest. It was all still there, untouched. But after what Layla said to me, after the line she crossed, I knew it was time. The desk drawer was stiff, as if it hadn't been opened in weeks. Inside, underneath an old planner and a framed photo of our wedding day, I found it. A plain white envelope with my name written on it in Gregory's handwriting. No date. No stamp. Just Vivian in that thick, confident script I'd memorized over the years from birthday cards and sticky notes he used to leave me on the fridge. I didn't open it right away. I sat in his chair for a long time, envelope pressed to my chest, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of the man who once warned me, softly, sadly, that Layla had changed. And I hadn't wanted to hear it. Weeks before his death, Gregory had stood at our kitchen counter with a mug in his hand, quiet in a way that made me turn off the TV just to hear him better. "She's not the same girl, Viv," he said. "She's chasing something that doesn't involve us anymore." I remember brushing it off. Told him she was just overwhelmed. Told him Elliot was a phase. He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "I've already made arrangements. Just in case." I thought he meant funeral instructions. I didn't realize he was preparing for betrayal. When I finally opened the envelope, my hands trembled. Inside was a single-page letter in Gregory's voice. Clear, direct, and personal. He wrote, "If you're reading this, it means Layla showed her hand. I knew she would. I've moved certain assets into protected channels. Contact Thomas Reed privately. Do not speak to Layla or Elliot about anything. Everything will be explained to you directly. Trust Maya." I saw her heart before I left. Love, Greg. I had to read it twice. Not because I didn't believe it, but because of what it meant. Gregory didn't just suspect something. He knew. He anticipated it. He had seen the coldness in our daughter long before I had the strength to admit it. Let me ask you something. Has someone you love ever warned you about a person you made excuses for? Only for you to realize they were right when it was almost too late. Tell me in the comments. Because guilt don't whisper. Screams. I didn't cry that night. I picked up the landline phone and dialed Thomas Reed directly. He answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. And the way he said it told me everything I needed to know. Gregory hadn't just left a letter. He'd left a plan. Thomas Reed's office was nothing like I expected. It sat on the 8th floor of an old brick building in downtown Baltimore, tucked between a private dental clinic and a vintage watch shop. No flashy nameplate on the door. Just T. Reed Iskew etched in gold on the frosted glass. The kind of place that said, If you know, you know. I stepped in and was greeted by silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that holds weight. Like every conversation in here was meant to change someone's life. Thomas stood when I entered. He was younger than Gregory, maybe mid-40s, clean-shaven, tall, and sharp-eyed in a way that made you feel like he already knew what you hadn't said yet. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't say sorry. He just nodded once and motioned toward the leather chair across from his desk. And somehow that was enough. "I've been expecting your call, Mrs. Burke," he said. Mr. Burke left very specific instructions. He slid a slim brown folder across the desk. I opened it expecting paperwork, maybe a will summary. But what I saw made my breath catch. It was a copy of the updated estate directives, dated just 12 days before Gregory died. 12. Not 12 months. 12 days. The amendments were bold. Assets that were once scheduled to funnel into a shared trust managed by Layla had been rerouted. Certain properties, ones Gregory built in secret through Shell Holdings, were now assigned to me and Maya exclusively. There were clauses, protections, proof. And then Thomas said the part that made me sit up straight. "There's also a video." Mr. Burke requested that it be played only at the official will reading. In front of all parties. He leaned forward. "But you should know something else. Your daughter and her husband came to me shortly after the funeral. They attempted to push an outdated version of the will, one Gregory had voided a year ago. They claimed you were in cognitive decline. That you needed a conservator." My blood ran cold. "They said what?" Thomas didn't blink. "They submitted a petition. I declined to support it." That's when I realized this wasn't just a matter of entitlement. Layla hadn't just cut me out emotionally. She had tried to cut me out legally. She wanted to erase me entirely. From the will, from Gregory's estate, from the record of our life. But Gregory had anticipated it. He had moved everything. He left breadcrumbs for me to find. And now I was sitting at the end of the trail with every piece starting to fit. Thomas flipped to another document. Maya's name. A trust established in her name, protected by a silent partnership with Emmett Sloan, Gregory's old friend who disappeared from the spotlight years ago but clearly never stopped working behind the scenes. "You said Maya," I whispered. Thomas nodded. He told me, "My youngest deserves more than silence." He said she had a heart that people overlooked, including you. That last part stung. 'Cause it was true. Let me ask you, have you ever ignored someone just because they didn't fight for space? Someone quiet, someone kind, someone who didn't demand attention so you forgot how much they mattered? If so, say it in the comments. I'll be the first to admit I did that with Maya. I closed the folder, placed my hands in my lap, and looked Thomas in the eye. "So what now?" He smiled faintly. "Now, Mrs. Burke, we follow Gregory's plan. And you take back everything they thought you didn't deserve." Maya had always been the quiet one. The kind of child who never demanded space. So the world rarely offered her any. Where Layla walked into a room and made it about her, Maya lingered by the wall, unnoticed, unseen, but always watching. I used to tell myself that was just her personality. That she was shy, maybe too sensitive. I didn't realize until much later that what I was calling quiet was really Maya learning how to live in a house that barely made room for her. After my meeting with Thomas, I called her. Not texted, called. And when she picked up and heard my voice, there was a pause. Not because she was surprised I'd reached out, but because it had been so long since I did. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. 3 words. That was all it took to bring the guilt up from my stomach like acid. "I need to see you," I told her. "Today." She didn't ask why. She just said, "Come by." Maya lived in a small one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore in Mount Vernon. The kind of place Layla would scoff at for not having valet parking or granite countertops. But when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. Her home smelled like chamomile and books. Plants in every corner. A wall of old vinyl records and soft yellow lighting. She hugged me, and for a second I couldn't let go. We sat across from each other with mugs of tea, and I studied her face like I hadn't in years. She had my eyes. Not Layla's sharp stare, but something warmer. Patient. She waited for me to speak first, but when I couldn't form the words, she reached out and said, "Whatever's going on, I'm with you. Let me tell you something. When you've spent years overlooking the child who would one day be your safe place, that kind of grace humbles you. And if you've ever been blessed enough to experience that reversal, drop a comment. Because it's a moment you don't forget." I told her everything. About the will. The changes Gregory made. The trust in her name. About how he finally saw her in a way none of us had. Not even me. I expected tears. Something. But Maya just nodded and said, "Daddy apologized to me. Before he died." And blinked. "He did." She nodded. "He came by one afternoon a few months back. Brought lunch. Said he was sorry for not paying attention. Said he thought Layla was the one who needed his protection, but now he realized it was me. He said he hoped it wasn't too late to make it right. I didn't know Gregory had done that. I didn't know he'd taken that step. And I hated that it took him that long, but I was grateful he'd gotten there. Flashbacks hit me like waves. Layla mocking Maya at 12 years old for reading comic books. Elliot telling her she'd never get anywhere in life if she didn't speak up more. Gregory brushing her off when she asked to help with one of his real estate projects. "Maybe next time, kiddo." And yet here she was. "Teddy. Oh. Ready. You were the girl we all forgot," I whispered. She gave me a small smile. "But I never forgot you." That's when I knew. This fight wasn't just about revenge. It was about correction. Restoration. Giving Maya the place she should have had all along. And what Layla was about to find out was that the sister she ignored was the one holding the key to everything she thought she'd stolen. When I met with Thomas the second time, I wasn't there as a grieving widow. I was there as a woman preparing for war. No tears. No hesitation. Just the stillness that settles in when a woman knows she's been lied to and finally has the proof in her hands. He didn't waste time. He handed me a thick folder stamped confidential across the front and said, "You need to see this for yourself." Inside were financial reports, digital logs, and transaction records linked to one of Gregory's holding companies. Companies I never even knew existed until Thomas explained how my husband had quietly built them to shield long-term assets. But the records showed something far worse than Layla's entitlement. They showed intention. 2 months before Gregory died, there had been multiple access attempts on that holding account, each flagged and denied. Thomas pulled up a digital audit trail on his tablet. "Look here," he said, pointing to a set of entries. This was traced back to Elliot's office IP address. He tried to initiate a liquidation request under the name G. Burke Jr., which of course doesn't exist. I stared at the screen. "They tried to impersonate Gregory." He nodded. "We believe Elliot forged the credentials, and Layla supported the attempt by making a call to one of the financial managers, claiming you were ill and Gregory had verbally authorized the transfer. We recorded the call." I sat there stunned. Not just at what they tried to do, but how confident they were that they could get away with it. They weren't just greedy. They were prepared to erase me. Erase Gregory's intention. And bury Maya right along with us. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone pretend to love you while actively preparing your downfall? Ever smiled at someone only to find out later they were busy rehearsing your obituary? Tell me in the comments. Because betrayal with a handshake hits different. They really thought I wouldn't find this, I murmured. Thomas leaned back. They counted on you grieving. And they counted on Maya not fighting. I looked at the printed emails, call logs, and forged signatures, one of which even misspelled Gregory's middle name. A mistake Layla would have never made if she actually knew her father's legal documents the way she claimed. I didn't yell. I didn't cuss. I just said one thing. I want everything copied and organized. Securely. Thomas nodded. Already done. There's more. Gregory had been consolidating everything into a final trust account. That account has not been touched. He locked it behind 2 levels of legal authorization, mine and Maya's. Layla doesn't even know it exists. I closed the folder and placed it in my lap. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They thought I was broken. They thought I was the widow they could shuffle off with a stipend and some flowers. But the numbers don't lie. And now I had something more powerful than grief. I had evidence. That night I went home and opened a blank notebook. On the first page I wrote one sentence. Every lie will answer to paper. And then I began building my case. Quietly, steadily, like the woman they never saw coming. Layla called it a private appreciation dinner. But let's be honest. It was a premature victory parade. Invitations were texted, not printed. Elliot made sure the location screamed exclusivity. A penthouse rooftop in the inner harbor, complete with white roses, gold-rimmed champagne flutes, and a custom ice sculpture shaped like the initials L and E. To the untrained eye, it looked like a celebration of love. To anyone paying attention, it looked like 2 people preparing to ascend a throne they hadn't been handed yet. I almost didn't go. Every bone in my body told me to stay home, sip tea, and wait for the will reading to do my speaking. But Maya was the one who convinced me otherwise. Let them see you, she said. Let them feel your silence. So we went. I wore a soft navy dress Gregory had given me on our 29th anniversary. Maya wore emerald, his favorite color. When we arrived, we didn't speak. We didn't rush to greet anyone. We simply walked in like women who belonged in the room. And that alone seemed to throw Layla off balance. She was glowing in designer everything, floating across the space like a first lady greeting donors. When she spotted us, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then snapped back into place. "Mom, Maya. You made it," she said, air-kissing me with a kind of tight politeness that only lives in country clubs and courtrooms. He nodded. Of course. Wouldn't miss it. Elliot approached seconds later, drink in hand, already loose-tongued from whatever arrogance he'd been sipping on. "Vivian, good to see you. We're just taking a moment to thank the people who've supported us through." "Well, everything. Everything." Layla took the mic shortly after. She tapped it once and raised her glass. "I just want to say thank you to our friends, our mentors, and our future partners. Daddy left us a powerful legacy, and Elliot and I are honored to carry it forward with intention, with purpose, and with vision." Applause filled the space. But my ears caught the cracks between her words. Carry it forward. She hadn't carried Gregory in years. Layla continued, tossing subtle jabs wrapped in compliments. "We believe in stewardship, not sentiment. That's why we've already met with top investors, secured project managers, and begun a transition plan for the estate. Daddy trusted us. And we won't let him down." There it was. A declaration from someone who hadn't even seen the full will yet. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone decorate a house they don't own? plan a future based on a lie they told themselves so many times they started to believe it. If you've seen that level of delusion before, drop a comment. Because it's wild what pride will convince a person to say before the ink has even dried. Maya whispered to me. She really thinks it's hers. I leaned in and whispered back. Let her finish the speech. It'll make what's coming even sweeter. As Layla wrapped up, Elliot pulled her in for a kiss, and the room clapped like they'd just witnessed the passing of a royal torch. But what none of them realized was that the real power was sitting quietly in the corner, sipping sparkling water and smiling like she was already on the other side of the storm. Because pretending is easy. But the paper, the will, the numbers, the trust wasn't make-believe. And very soon, that rooftop would feel like the stage of a tragedy neither of them rehearsed for. When I stepped into Thomas Reed's office that morning, I didn't expect to leave with leverage sharp enough to split my daughter's lies wide open. I thought I already had everything I needed. Paper trail, the recordings, the asset maps. But Thomas had one more gift Gregory left behind. And this one changed everything. He didn't start with a greeting this time. He simply slid a single-page document across his desk, his eyes never leaving mine. This, he said, tapping his finger once, is the clause. I picked it up slowly, scanning the legal text. It looked like standard language until I reached the highlighted paragraph near the bottom. In the event that any beneficiary named within this will is found to have committed or conspired in fraudulent activity related to the assets listed herein, that beneficiary shall be fully disqualified from all claims, rights, and distributions. I read it again, then again. Thomas folded his hands. Gregory had it added 2 days before he signed the final version. It was notarized, witnessed, locked in. My mouth went dry. So if Layla's actions, what she and Elliot tried to do, if we prove it, she's out, Thomas said. Completely. Permanently. Let me tell you something. Grief makes you quiet. But betrayal makes you focused. And revenge, if you do it right, it doesn't come loud. Comes patient, precise, professional. Like a scalpel, not a hammer. I sat back in the chair, that page trembling in my hand just slightly. Because I knew what I held wasn't just ink and paper. It was power. Not just over the money, but over the narrative. Over the shame they thought they could dump on me like I wouldn't know what to do with it. Do we have enough to prove it? Yes. Thomas reached for another folder. We're close. The financial logs. The impersonation attempt. The recordings. If we can lock in 2 more points, one from a witness and one from a digital timestamp, she's cooked. And if she tries to counter, she won't win, he said calmly. Because the truth is a better storyteller than she is. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had the chance to bring justice not by screaming in someone's face, but by handing over their own receipts? Have you ever sat in silence, knowing the person who tried to humiliate you was about to be humiliated on a stage they built themselves? If you've ever felt that power, say it in the comments. Because that's the moment I tasted it. I took a deep breath and stood. Let's finish it then. But Thomas stopped me before I reached the door. There's something else, he said. Gregory left a specific instruction for when the clause gets triggered. He wanted it read aloud. After the video. He said, and I quote, I want her to hear it from me, but I want the law to echo it. I nodded once, gripped the folder and walked out. I didn't cry on the ride home. I didn't shake. I sat in the back seat while Maya drove, staring out the window, planning each move in my head like a game of chess. Because I no longer had to wonder what would happen at the reading. I just had to decide what I wanted Layla to lose first. Her pride, her inheritance, or her illusion of control. I never told Layla I kept in touch with Janelle Carter. There was no need. In her mind, Janelle was just one of those old work friends from my nursing days. Sweet, forgettable, harmless. But what she didn't know was that Janelle had gone back to school, earned her certification in forensic accounting, and now worked part-time consulting for small estate law firms. And what Layla really didn't know was that Janelle owed me a favor. So when I called and asked if she could help me track a few things behind the scenes, Janelle didn't hesitate. "Tell me where to start," she said. And just like that, the digging began. We met late evenings in her basement office, surrounded by manila folders, highlighted spreadsheets, and 2 laptops that rarely went to sleep. Maya joined us on the 3rd day. Quiet at first, then sharper than I'd ever seen her. She was the one who suggested cross-referencing the timing of Layla's financial activity with Gregory's calendar notes, most of which Thomas had access to. That's how we found the first real crack. 7 weeks before Gregory's death, Layla logged into one of his dormant business accounts and wired $45,000 to an interior design firm in Elliot's name. The transaction was buried under a vague project label, Consulting Suite Renovations, but the address listed wasn't an office. It was the same penthouse they hosted their appreciation dinner in. Janelle raised an eyebrow. Using a dead man's wallet to pay for a party before the will's even cold? Bold. Then came the second discovery. One of Gregory's shell companies, used to quietly purchase undervalued properties for long-term development, had mysteriously listed a lot for sale through a private agent. Gregory hadn't listed a property in over a year. And the digital signature used to approve the listing. A copy-pasted scan of Gregory's initials from an old lease agreement, slightly tilted, with the exact same pixel artifacts. Floppy. Traceable. They thought no one would notice, Maya said, flipping through the digital archive. Or maybe they thought no one cared. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone so certain they got away with something that they stopped covering their tracks entirely? It's like watching a magician explain their tricks mid-performance, thinking the audience won't catch on. If you've ever seen arrogance dig its own grave, drop it in the comments, because that's exactly what this was. We kept stacking the evidence. Timestamps, screenshots, inconsistencies in Elliot's investor pitches, even a deleted email thread between Layla and a potential buyer trying to expedite the process on the secret property deal. We recovered it. Every word. Janelle leaned back one night, rubbing her eyes. They were planning this for months. Before Gregory even got sick. That hit me harder than I expected. It meant his death wasn't just an opportunity for them. It was the green light they'd been waiting for. They didn't stumble into greed. They had mapped it out like a business model. And that made what we were doing not just about inheritance. It was about exposing a strategy built on theft, ego, and delusion. I opened my notebook again that night, the same one I started after Thomas showed me the clause. Page 6. I wrote. She thought she could bury her father and rob his legacy in the same breath. But I came with a shovel of my own. Because now the truth wasn't just on our side. It was indexed, time-stamped, and ready for the world to see. There's a stillness that settles over you when you know something big is about to happen. Not fear. Not even nerves. Just stillness. That's what filled the house the morning before the will reading. Maya and I moved around like we were getting ready for a family reunion that wasn't ours anymore. I ironed a navy blue blouse I hadn't worn in years. She steamed a pressed cream suit. Nobody spoke much. But every now and then our eyes would meet across the room. And that was enough. I watched her in the mirror as she adjusted her earrings. She looked so much like the woman I had always hoped she'd become. Poised, composed, deeply grounded in something that couldn't be shaken. And yet, I saw the flicker of something else in her face that morning. A question she hadn't spoken aloud. Until she finally did. Is this justice, Mom? she asked quietly, not turning away from her reflection. Or is this revenge? I didn't answer right away. I folded the sleeves of my blouse and sat down on the edge of my bed. That depends, I said. What do you think the difference is? She hesitated. Revenge is about hurting someone back. Justice is about making something right. I nodded slowly. Then we're doing both. She finally turned to face me. And are you okay with that? Smiled. Let me tell you something, baby. For years I thought being quiet meant being good. I thought keeping the peace meant I was doing the right thing. But silence isn't peace. Silence is where injustice gets comfortable. And your sister's been far too comfortable for far too long. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between what feels kind and what feels necessary? Ever been told to be the bigger person, when being silent only helped the one who hurt you? If so, drop a comment because I think it's time we talk about how much damage that kind of thinking really does. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Layla was celebrating. Again. Thomas had tipped me off that she'd scheduled a post-reading luncheon at a luxury restaurant. Full guest list, photographer, menus with her initials at the top. She didn't just believe she'd already won. She was crafting her narrative for the public before the story even unfolded. Elliot had apparently told a few contacts that the estate transition would accelerate new investment opportunities. She'd even given Maya's name to a non-profit director as someone who might be willing to volunteer once the family dust settles. I read all this in forwarded emails and polite whispers passed along to Thomas. I didn't get mad. I just smiled. Because people like Layla don't change when you confront them. They only change when you corner them, with proof, silence, and undeniable truth. Later that night, Maya and I sat on the porch, sharing a plate of sliced mango like we used to when she was little. The air was heavy but not tense. I could feel her heart settle. What if it doesn't go the way we think? She asked. I reached for her hand. Then at least it'll go the way it should. Because tomorrow wasn't about money. It was about legacy, correction, and the kind of truth that speaks louder than any inheritance ever could. There's a silence in a lawyer's office that feels different than anywhere else. It's not the kind that invites reflection. It's the kind that signals consequences. And on the morning of the will reading, that silence hit hard the moment we stepped through Thomas Reed's door. The room was perfectly arranged. Just enough chairs to make things feel intimate, but far enough apart that everyone had space to pretend they weren't watching each other. Thomas sat at the head of a long walnut table, his expression unreadable. A small box-shaped speaker rested beside a thick leather-bound folder. Maya and I took our seats to his left. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. Layla breezed in 3 minutes late like she was entering a brunch, not a legal proceeding. Cream blazer, gold heels, a nude clutch tucked under her arm. Elliot followed, adjusting his cufflinks like this was just another business deal he was about to win. They didn't look nervous. They looked entertained. Layla gave us a nod, barely. Glad you made it, Mom. Thought you might sit this one out. Elliot snorted under his breath and added, She probably thinks we're here to negotiate. Thomas didn't react. He simply cleared his throat and gestured for everyone to sit. Once we were settled, he opened the folder and flipped through a few pages. The room tensed as the shuffle of papers echoed off the walls like whispers before a storm. As the legal executor of the estate of Mr. Gregory Burke, Thomas began, I will now proceed with the reading of his final will and testament. Layla leaned back in her chair, arms folded, lips pursed in manufactured patience. She was the picture of smugness, composed, confident, and already imagining herself signing documents that weren't hers. Before I begin, Thomas continued, Mr. Burke left behind a message. A video recorded 48 hours before his passing. Per his written instructions, it is to be viewed in full before any part of the will is read or acknowledged. Layla blinked once. A video. Elliot straightened. Is that necessary? Thomas glanced up calmly. It was non-negotiable. Layla rolled her eyes, muttered something about dramatic theatrics, and crossed her legs tightly. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat in a room full of people who swore they were in control, only to realize too late that they were seated at your table? That's what this moment felt like. The shift hadn't happened yet, but I could feel the weight of it hovering in the air like thunder. Thomas pressed a button on the speaker. Soft crackle. And then Gregory's voice. If you're watching this, he said, I'm no longer here. But trust me, I'm still speaking. Layla rolled her eyes again. But Elliot was starting to blink more. He leaned forward, fingers twitching slightly on the armrest. Gregory continued. There are things I saw toward the end that I never spoke about. But I left proof. And I left decisions. Ones I made not based on sentiment, but on truth. That's when Layla shifted. And I knew right then, this wasn't just about to get real. It was about to get recorded. The screen flickered once. Then twice. And then Gregory's face appeared. Clear, centered, and still very much himself. He wore a dark button-up, no tie. Sitting in his study with that quiet weight he always carried when he was about to say something that mattered. If you're watching this, he began again, then you've all gathered for the reading of my will. And if Layla's sitting there with Elliot beside her, then I assume a few things have already happened. First, I'm gone. Second, they're already smiling. And third, they think they've won. Layla shifted in her seat. Her arms uncrossed. Her lips parted just slightly, but no sound came out. Gregory leaned forward in the video. But they didn't. Not this time. Thomas didn't flinch. The room was still as marble. Maya sat motionless beside me, her hands folded, her breathing steady. But I could feel her energy change, like something inside her was finally exhaling after years of holding it in. I made mistakes, Gregory continued. As a husband, as a father, especially to you, Maya. I overlooked what I should have nurtured. I protected what I should have questioned. But before I left this world, I made sure to set things straight. He pulled a stack of papers from his lap in the video. This is a record of every attempt made to access my business holdings under fraudulent circumstances. This is proof of funds rerouted to accounts I never authorized. This is the voice recording of my daughter, Layla, lying to one of my financial managers about my health in an attempt to move money before I was even buried. Layla gasped. That's a lie, she said, her voice cracking slightly. Thomas pressed a button and paused the video. Ms. Burke, he said without looking at her, you will not interrupt again. This message was written into the estate process as a binding element. Any disruption can legally disqualify you from the remainder of the proceeding. Layla's mouth opened, then shut. Elliot placed a hand on her arm, but she shook it off. Thomas restarted the video. As of 12 days before my death, Gregory continued, I rewrote my will. I assigned full rights to my estate to my wife, Vivian Burke, my partner in life, my constant, and the woman who deserved far more peace than I ever gave her. The remainder of the estate, including property and investments, will be divided into a private trust fund for Maya Burke, to be administered at my instruction. Layla looked like she had swallowed glass. Gregory leaned back in the video and exhaled. And to Layla, I leave nothing. Because the moment you tried to erase your mother from my legacy, You erased yourself. The screen went black. For a full 10 seconds no one moved. Then Layla stood. This is insane. This isn't real. I demand a. That's when Thomas let out a laugh. A short, sharp, almost disbelieving chuckle. He leaned back, closed the will folder gently, and looked directly at her. You told your own mother she'd get nothing from the $50 million your father left? That might be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Layla's mouth hung open. Elliot stared down at the table like he wished it would collapse and swallow him whole. And me. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there, calm, whole, and finally seen. Because Gregory didn't just leave us a message. He left us freedom. The air felt different when we walked out of that conference room. Not because of what had just been said, but because of what hadn't. Layla didn't utter another word. Elliot didn't follow her. And the silence between them was louder than anything Gregory said on that video. The guests, some family, some old business partners, some hangers-on hoping to be written into the will, stood awkwardly. A few offered half-hearted hugs to Layla out of habit. Most simply nodded toward me or Maya and walked out with their heads spinning. The whispers had already begun. But for once, I didn't care what anyone said. Because no one could rewrite what they had just seen. No one could unwatch that truth on screen. Layla's empire, built on borrowed pride and counterfeit power, was collapsing in real time. And there was no one left to hold it up. She stormed down the hall, heels clicking violently, dragging her purse behind her. Elliot didn't chase after her. Instead, he lingered behind and stared at the floor like a man trying to remember what rock he'd left his dignity under. Thomas packed the documents slowly, methodically, not a word spoken. When he finished, he handed me a small envelope. Gregory left this for you personally, he said. Inside was a simple card. No fancy handwriting. No long letter. Just 2 words. You knew. I did. Deep down I always did. And yet I still tried to protect the version of Layla I once loved. Before the money, before the control, before the man who saw my daughter as a tool instead of a person. Maya didn't say much on the ride home. But when we pulled into the driveway, she held my hand and said, "Thank you for seeing me, even when no one else did." I wanted to tell her I hadn't always done that. That I, too, had failed her in small, quiet ways. That I let the noise of Layla's ambition drown out Maya's quiet brilliance. But I didn't need to say it. Think she already knew. That night Thomas called. "Vivian, just so you're aware, Gregory's financial team has opened the trust access for Maya. Her first deposit has already cleared. And as for Layla and Elliot," he paused. "You'll be pleased to know an investigation is being launched regarding their attempts to tamper with Gregory's accounts before his death." I forwarded the materials we uncovered. I didn't smile. But I exhaled. A real exhale. Not the kind you give to make others comfortable. The kind that only comes when the weight of years lifts off your chest like fog giving way to sunlight. Brewed tea. I lit the candle Gregory had always hated. I curled up in my reading chair and finally opened that book I'd started 3 years ago. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to gloat. Because when empires fall, the dust does the talking. And that night I let the silence speak for me. The funny thing about peace is, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock or ring a bell or scream. You made it. Just arrives. And that morning, standing barefoot on my new porch, coffee in one hand, wind tugging at my robe, I realized peace had finally made its way to me. I'm Vivian. I'm 64 years old. And I've survived betrayal, buried my husband, watched my daughter become someone I didn't recognize, and lived to see a war end without ever raising my voice. Maya's laughter echoed from inside. She was on the phone, something about a study abroad application. Her life was finally hers now. Not Layla's shadow. Not Gregory's guilt. Just Maya. I smiled at that. Thomas called 2 days ago. Elliot's court date was set. Fraud. Attempted pre-mortem liquidation. Breach of fiduciary duty. I didn't need to know all the legal terms. Just that justice was doing its quiet work, one piece at a time. Layla hadn't been seen publicly in weeks. Word was she fled the state after the lawyer sent her the final letter. She was no longer entitled to a single cent. The clause Gregory added had stripped her clean. Not out of spite but principle. He loved her once. But even love must bow to truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't parade. I had spent too many years trying to hold a family together with duct tape and prayer. I tried to be the glue, the shield, the forgiver. But what no one tells you is this. You can't save people who are committed to sinking. So I stopped trying. And that's when I got free. Tamika, the neighbor, dropped by with homemade muffins. She was the only one from the old neighborhood who didn't take sides when things fell apart. "Viv, your skin is glowing," she said, laughing. "You finally sleeping." "I'm finally resting," I replied. Not sleeping to escape. Not numbing the pain. But resting. Because for the first time I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. There was no big apology from Layla. No last-minute reconciliation. And honestly, I didn't need one. Closure is a myth people sell to keep you waiting at the edge of your healing. I didn't want closure. I wanted peace. And peace meant accepting that some doors are best left shut. Bolted, in fact. I kept one of Gregory's sweaters. The gray one he wore on our anniversary trip. It still smelled like his cologne. And I kept one photo in the hallway, him, Maya, and me. Not because everything had been perfect, but because not everything had been fake either. People are layered like that. Capable of love and still deeply flawed. The estate was now fully in my name. Maya's trust was active. And I had started something new. A women's estate prep workshop at the community center. Nothing fancy. Just a place to help women protect what's theirs before it's too late. One of them asked me last week, "How do you even begin to move on after something like that?" And I told her the truth. You don't move on. You build forward. There's a difference. The old me waited for apologies. Waited for someone to understand my pain before I let it go. But this version of me, I burn my own incense, sign my own papers, and laugh freely, even when no one's around. Gregory once said, "You hold people up so well, you forget to hold yourself." I don't forget anymore. So to anyone watching this, maybe you've been disrespected, discarded, counted out by the very people you raised. Maybe someone you love made you feel like peace was too expensive for a woman like you. I'm here to tell you. Peace isn't a prize they hand you. Peace is what you give yourself. When you decide you've had enough.